Hey guys, so some of you guys asked about my experiences with interlocking and palm rolling because I've done both. I started off my journey with two-strand twist and I started off interlocking them. I think I got them interlocked like 2 or 3 times before I switched to retwisting. When I was interlocking, I was going about every 6 weeks, and then when I started palm rolling, I started going about every 8 weeks or so. And I feel like now I could probably go even longer. But first, let's talk about the differences between interlocking and palm rolling for those that aren't very familiar. So interlocking is literally like a method where you use a tool. Some people use like a crochet hook. Some people use like a dedicated interlocking tool. There's a lot of possibilities. Some people use a paper clip or like a safety pin, things like that to do this. But you essentially it's where you're taking the end of the lock and putting it through the root of the lock in a pattern. So you don't just do it all willy-nilly. There is like a science, well, not a science, but there's a method to it. Some people use a 2-point rotation where you only go in 2 directions and you repeat that pattern over and over again. Some people do 4-point method, and then you have the 3-point method. But that's a whole different video right there in itself. So palm rolling is, for the most people, that's the most familiar method, the most common method of maintaining traditional size locks. And it's essentially where, you retwist the hair in a circular direction and usually palm roll it. So they usually just go like that to twist the lock into a circular pattern. And that's the most basic method of maintaining locks. And there's other methods like the crochet method and things like that out there. But I don't have experience with that. I only have experience with interlocking and retwist. So for me, I switched. A lot of people ask me this, like, why did you switch from interlocking to palm rolling? One, my locks are big enough to do that. Like, if a lot of my followers, some of you guys have micro locks and things like that, you have to make sure that your locks are actually big enough to actually be palm rolled if you're considering switching. For me, mine were. But I have fine hair, and something that's really important to me is volume. So I learned at a certain point that interlocking forms a tighter, more compact lock, and palm rolling, the lock has more room to expand. So that's why I essentially switched, because essentially, like, when you palm roll, the new growth is forming like a coil, and with the coil it has more room to expand and to fill in, versus like interlocking, you're forming the inside of the lock, and then from there it fluffs out a little bit. And usually it's a little more frizzy because you're not maintaining like the outside of the lock. You're literally just forming the inside, the internal structure of the lock, and letting it fluff out and form a lock. So back in November, I decided to experiment and actually just try palm rolling. I haven't really talked about the subject since because I think I've gotten my hair retwisted 3 times now. So I kind of wanted to like actually see the effects of both like over time. And so far, I don't really have too much. I will say the retwisted portion is a little thicker than like the portions that were interlocked, but it's kind of still too early to say because your hair still kind of like expands and fluffs up and changes over time when it comes to locks. Because if you notice, the part that's like retwisted is always like super skinny at first, and then it fluffs out and evens out to the size of the rest of the lock. So that's why it's kind of like hard to tell, since it's only been like not that long for me that I've been doing palm rolling. One misconception that people have about like interlocking versus palm rolling is that like with retwisting you can't necessarily have an active lifestyle, or they're afraid that you sweat and then boom, your retwist is done, and that's not the fact. I just found that I've just had to take a little bit more precautions than I would with interlocking. So like I braid my hair up and things like that before I work out. I have a whole video on that, so check that out on my YouTube channel if you're interested in maintaining a retwist while being active and sweating on your scalp and things like that. I will say, if you swim or something like that, then you probably won't want to retwist if you're like an active swimmer. For me, I don't swim that frequently. I plan on getting back into swimming, but I figure it's just for exercise every once in a while. So I would only do it like after I don't really care about my retwist or whatever. So like around the 3 or 4 week mark, I might swim or whatever, or anywhere from there on up until like my next retwist appointment. Another benefit of retwisting versus interlocking is that you see your growth a lot more quicker with palm rolling versus interlocking, because interlocking, you're taking the end of the hair and taking it through the root several times, so that kind of like doesn't necessarily like elongate your hair as much as like retwisting does. Retwisting, it's literally you can see the hair elongated because you're taking it from like the fro state, your hair when it grows in, your new growth is all, curled up and it's like a little fro underneath your locks. And so you're taking that and smoothing it out into like a coil. So it kind of like gives you a little bit more length quicker than like interlocking would. Also for me, because I'm in the military and I travel, and I know people with sister locks that are in the military, but for me, it was easier and cheaper to find someone to retwist my hair versus interlocking. I feel like there's more people that do retwisting than interlocking, or sometimes like I went to one of my appointments, I went to a sister locks consultant to get my hair tightened, and they're just sometimes really booked, sometimes like very booked, so it's hard to get on their calendars and things like that, and you have to have the consultation first. So for me, it's easier to find someone to retwist as well in comparison to interlocking. I also want to argue to say that if you started with two-strand twist and you're looking for a more even look from the root to the length of your lock, that palm rolling would do you better if that's something that you're concerned about. I'm not concerned about it. I already know I'm gonna have like bumpy locks because I started with two-strand twist. I started interlocking. So like again, when you're interlocking, you're only maintaining the root. You're not maintaining. So unless someone goes back and like palm rolls your hair, or you crochet the twisted part of your hair or something like that, you're not going to get like a symmetric look from root to tip. And because I started off interlocking, and I wasn't braiding and banding when I first started my locks, I'm gonna have like some seriously like bumpy locks. Like, I don't know if you guys can see this one or not. Like, I'm gonna have some like seriously bumpy locks at the ends, and I'm okay with that. With palm rolling, it's helping smooth out some of it, but some of the bumps, like, they're already there. There's nothing I can do about them, whatever. So it is what it is. It's not something that I care about too much. Last but not least, I feel more comfortable having like if I start maintaining my own hair, which I don't right now just because I don't feel like putting the energy or effort into it right now, but I feel like when I do, I would feel a lot more comfortable retwisting my hair versus interlocking it, just because I do interlock like the ones in the back row and things like that, or on the sides where they're, I have like smaller locks because my hair is finer. And there's been times where I've almost, interlocked 2 locks together, almost, on multiple occasions. And maybe that's because I don't look in the mirror or whatever, but I just, feel comfortable like just not using the mirror, and because of that, I've almost interlocked my hair together, and it's scary because I'm like, how would I even undo this mess? So with retwisting, you don't have to worry about accidentally interlocking your hair together and trying to figure out how to separate those two, or now you have one gigantic lock or something like that you didn't plan on having. So there's that. So my last takeaway is this: just do your research, or if you're adventurous like me, feel free to try both methods and see which one you like better. Just make sure that your locks, like I mentioned before, are big enough to be palm rolled or retwisted if you're going to experiment with that method. If you have, micro locks that are close to sister lock size, very small micro locks or something like that, you probably won't be able to. But if your locks are around like my size or larger, you definitely could experiment with both methods and see what works for you. Or like I said, just do your research. Some people, there's pros and cons to both methods, and some people find that one is just better suited to fit their lifestyle, And remember, you know, if you do decide to retwist or you're stuck on retwisting, remember there's things that you can do to help your retwist last longer. So that being said, I hope you enjoyed it. Please drop any questions or comments below that you may have, and I will answer them in future videos. So stay tuned.